A life or death struggle with a lizard alien in front of a super advanced being. Time travel. And a courtroom drama where Kirk defends himself against a charge of murder. Welcome to another episode of the To Baldly Go podcast, in which we are watching Star Trek from the beginning as I attempt to learn why people like this franchise, how it is still popular today, and have some nerdy conversations along the way. Just maybe, I'll come to embrace the series as well. I'm your host, Aaron, and tonight I am joined by my friend Nate as we discuss the next 3 episodes of Star Trek, the original series, Arena, Tomorrow is Yesterday, and Court Martial. Now, helmsman, plot a course, ahead, warp factor 2. All right, shall we dive into this week's episodes?
Let's do it.
All right. So the first one we have this week is episode 19. Can't believe we're already 19 episodes. Well, I guess at the end of this, 21 episodes in. I feel like the show is now kind of finding its feet, figuring out what it is a bit better. There's obviously world building, there's development that comes, and I think as soon as there's no more development, the show kind of would wither. So you see all of that still. I enjoyed all of these episodes this week. I think the first one here, the Arena, I left it feeling like if you don't like this episode, you probably don't care for the original series.
I think that's probably very fair.
This felt very much like what I would have thought Star Trek would be coming into it. Now that's not to say there's no nuance to it, because I thought there was a lot of nuance in this episode, and a lot that I thought was like, in a way, as I'm in one side saying, like, I think they've really found their footing, have figured out kind of what they're trying to be, what the show is. It's all coming together and it doesn't feel like they're figuring a lot out in terms of making the show in this episode. But at the same time, I feel like the message is a little convoluted in this one, points of it. I guess we can do our ratings of this one. I liked it. I thought it was a good episode, so I called it a 7.
Okay.
But at the same time, I could be persuaded to go 6 or 8. I could go anywhere from okay to great on this episode, because, like I said, I do feel like it was it was peak campiness for what we've seen so far. Yep. The slow motion fight with the Gorn costume, it was so like what I think people who make fun of Star Trek people, that's what they think of. Yep. They think that just over the top. But it was fine.
Yeah, it was good.
It was super campy, but the show is super campy.
Yes.
So
and that's what shows are like that. I mean,
exactly.
Campiness was part of what made it what it is. Like, a lot of shows in that time period were very campy.
Right. And so that's kind of where I felt like, if you don't like this episode, you probably don't like the original series.
Yep.
Not to make any kind of indictment or opinion on any of the future series, but as far as the original series goes, this episode basically embodied everything that I anticipated or expected from the original series. Yep. Good for me. I liked it.
Yeah.
I found it a very enjoyable episode. I thought there were some just interesting situations, interesting lines, themes that came up. What are some of your kind of initial thoughts on it? I've got more thoughts as we go
Oh
deeper,
yeah.
but
So I hated it. I gave it one. Oh, I'm kidding.
oh,
Um, no, this is one of the I've seen this episode many times. This is one of the few that I, remember a little bit more vividly.
mhm,
Not so much the beginning part of it, but definitely the scenes of Kirk on the planet with the
right.
Gorn and kind of all of that. I remember very vividly. And so as I was watching it, and this is a very classic Star Trek episode. Like this is
Yes.
to your point, in the broader scheme of Star Trek, in the episodes that often spring to mind when people look back on the original series, this is one of those episodes that people talk about a lot.
Right.
I'm
And
sure it's
and
probably in the top 10 list somewhere. I don't know where it would fit overall with the series, but it's very well known.
yeah. And that's
Um,
that's kind of a feeling I had just in watching it. I would have speculated that this is a this is an episode people think of.
yeah, for sure. So given that, I debated a lot on my rating. And part of the struggle I had was, am I rating it higher because I know what it is and where it fits in the broader scheme and that
Yeah.
it's very well regarded as an episode, or do I really feel like it's that good of an episode? I ended up giving it an 8. I could be convinced to go down to a 7. But at the end of the day, I kind of landed there. And looking back at some of my past ratings, things that I had rated a 7, like, did I like this more or less? So if you look back at, like, I gave Miri a 7, I gave Charlie X a 7, I gave the Galileo 7 a 7, and I think I like this episode more than all of those.
Yeah.
So I think it deserves that 8. The only 9 I've given out was the Naked Time, and I don't think this is as good as the Naked Time was.
Right.
So I think it's there. I
Yeah.
think it's a fair rating for it.
Yeah.
So that's
And
where I landed.
like I said on mine, so I had some bits of it that I even when I gave my rating of a 7, I said I could go down to a 6 potentially, or I could even go up to an 8 because I thought there were a lot of great elements to this episode. It was fun, it was campy, it was silly, but it was still good. Like it was really good. There were some bits of it that I thought got a bit, I'll say, heavy-handed in how preachy it was getting and
Yep.
in the messaging of it, and I thought that was a bit of a detraction from it. But at the same time, I get it. Like I had some no, I mean, a big point of it was like the inherent violent tendencies,
Mhm.
and clearly this was a big commentary on humanity
Yeah.
and how apparently little progress they see over the next 300 years in their vision here. But thinking through a few things, there were um yeah, just that constant theme of this inherent violence, this savagery, this lack of civilization, or yeah, just this violent intent and not being civilized. I felt like that got a bit heavy-handed, and I also think the message was a bit convoluted at the end
Yeah.
because it's like in this regard, I don't know if they know what they're trying to even portray. Um, so I had a few thoughts on that. So one thing, how they talked about the Gorn basically said, "Well, we destroyed invaders," and then McCoy saying, "Oh, maybe we're in the wrong here." Now, what's going on in the world at this time is the fairly early on in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's right there and thinking
Sure.
like, okay, are we in the wrong in being involved in this over there? Are we invading without necessarily passing any judgment on it, or they
Yep.
probably were passing quite a bit of judgment on it.
I
Uh,
think there was implied judgment there
yes,
that they were in the wrong, right?
right.
And I think it's an interesting debate.
Exactly.
I hadn't thought about the Vietnam War aspect of it and where we were in that timeline. I think you're probably spot on there. But the whole I made a note somewhere in here. In general, how do you determine borders when you don't know who's around you?
Yeah.
It's very clear that they've had limited to no interaction with the Gorn. They don't
Yeah.
know who these Metrons are. They're out exploring. They're trying to understand, this new frontier that they're that's out there. And how do you know when you've gone too far?
Yeah.
And maybe there's another metaphor that maybe wasn't intentional, but think about it back from colonial America and the folks coming over from Europe and expanding across the continent and displacing all the Native American tribes that were there. And they just saw it as, hey, this is a new place that we can
Yeah.
expand into and reap the rewards of all its resources without thinking of like, hey, maybe there were people here before us.
Right.
And so I think there's probably a lot of those things that we can pull out through human history
Yeah.
that are
Oh, yeah.
relevant here.
I think that's all of human history.
Right. 100%. So
Because the
I think
people
it's
who are somewhere
interesting.
now took it from somebody who was there before, who took it from somebody who was there before,
Yeah.
who took it from somebody who was there before.
The history of humanity is colonialism, right?
Right.
At the end of the day.
Exactly.
So I just think it's an interesting commentary from that regard.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure they meant some of that. I think you're probably right. It was probably more of a commentary on the Vietnam War. Um, but I think as a broader, look at the universe, and as we think about humanity, moving out the stars, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think we pretty much know that there isn't sentient life anywhere in our solar system right now, but who's to say when we have the technology to visit other solar systems that we don't run into the same issues?
Right.
And how do we handle that? And I think that's what a lot of the commentary here is on that episode.
Yeah.
Like on top of the whole primitive violence thing
Yeah.
that the Metrons were leaning in on.
Now, yeah, where my I don't want to say issues, that doesn't quite seem right because it's not really an issue, but where
Mhm.
my, I guess, criticism of that messaging in this episode would be is in like the Metrons were basically playing the role of an equally violent, if not more violent, just God over them.
Yep.
Now, in a funny sense, I thought of it. What the Metrons were doing was kind of like Bill Engvall's joke when he tells his kid, like, "Dunk, we don't hit." Just like you are this uncivilized, violent species, and now we're going to make you fight to the death, and whoever loses, we're going to kill all your people. That that to me makes their message in this episode really confusing
Mhm.
because now and I don't know what in that regard I don't know what the actual message of this episode is because
Mhm.
on the one hand the Metrons are this like greatly progressed society with the little bit that we see, or at least
Right.
that's how they're presenting themselves. Yet at the same time, they're playing God and very willing to have two parties fight to the death
Mhm.
with the lives of ships and crew and hundreds of other people on the line,
Right.
which would seem rather uncivilized. So eh, there it's I struggle with that part of it. And then I also struggle a little bit. It felt like I love when we have flawed characters that we love, but they're
Yep.
not perfect. They have problems. They make bad decisions. They do the wrong things, but then they learn from it. They grow. They do all that. That's why we like these
Mhm.
kinds of characters, and I think that's what we see here a lot. But I struggled with the portrayal of them as basically being bad guys. It felt a bit like what I didn't like about season 8 of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Now, in that's a show about cops, and now is not a very popular time in society to be doing much positive in that regard. And the final season of that show, spoilers for another show coming up,
Lost it off the air for
were
3 years.
incredibly negative toward towards the police, and specifically some of these characters that we had been following for 8 years.
Yeah.
Um, and that really didn't sit well with me on that show. So I felt a little bit like that in this one. It's just like, yeah, they're out there, they're doing all these things. Are they perfect? Far from it. But turning them from being not perfect or a little bit flawed into like actually negative things was a little maybe off-putting.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, they come around at the end and Kirk shows mercy, and they're referred to as what is it? A most promising species as far as predators go.
I actually really like that last
So
line.
I thought that was really good, and I do like how they brought it back around. And clearly, my reservations about this episode don't really go that far because I did think it was a really good episode. But there were some things where I thought the messaging was convoluted, where it was kind of like, I don't even know if they know what they were trying to say. And they just threw a bunch of shit at the wall to see what would stick.
So I think that's very likely. The other thing that I struggled with is the concept that if you're a higher life form, that you don't have any predilection to violence whatsoever. And I don't know that that's true or could be true. I think at the end of the day, most life forms that are more than a single celled organism living in a puddle of water have some level of self-preservation. Right. It's literally wired into everything, and I just don't know. Certainly there's room for improvement for the human species, but I don't think a tendency to violence is necessarily an indicator of being a lower life form. And I think, to your point, the Metrons kind of prove that by making Kirk and the Gorn duke it out on this planet. Like, what are you, Julius Caesar, and you're throwing them into? I mean, that's kind of the metaphor right there, right?
Yeah.
We don't think anything of them, so we're gonna let them kill each other. And Kirk's response basically to that, as he finally gains the upper hand and wins, is to not finish off the Gorn. To say, look, I got far enough to preserve my own life. I don't need to go any further. I don't need to kill him in order to continue forward. I just needed to stop him.
Right.
And that's what he did. And he had that moment where he could have finished it off, and then he didn't. And I think that's more of a defining characteristic of.
I agree.
Like, do you know the limit? Do you know how far to take it before you're done?
Yep.
So,
yeah. So now taking on Abby's role a little bit of doing some trivia here.
Yeah.
So the way the Metrons stated it early on was that they'll fight to the death, and the loser, his ship and everything will be destroyed for losing.
Yep.
So there was something the Metron told Kirk that he demonstrated mercy so he won't be destroyed. And apparently there was something in the original script or in the dialogue that wasn't actually aired in the show, that the Metron explains that all along their plan was actually to kill the Winter's crew and ship because they posed a greater threat. which again
Oh,
I think proves my point of
yeah.
the Metrons were just hypocritical assholes who were playing a very violent, godlike role in 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 saying like we don't hit
I
by hitting awfully hard. And I think that's what didn't sit great with me. And I love that Kirk came around at the end and he had that heroic role of going above and beyond that and saying, I don't have to kill him. I defeated him. Now let us go on our way.
Do you think the story would have been better or worse had they added that additional scene or dialogue?
I don't know if it would have made much difference because really it just confirmed the things that I was already feeling or thinking about the episode. And it just more confirmed what I didn't like about the Metrons in it. But overall, I still thought it was a good episode. It had a lot to like.
Yep.
And yeah, a few other points I made note of. I think this was the first reference that we had to the Federation.
Yep. I made it
Uh,
as well.
'Cause now we have heard the word Federation before, but that was Baylock as part of the first Federation ships
Mhm.
or whatever. Um, I did find the Enterprise was the only defense that the colony or the base or whatever that was, um, the fort at Cestus 3. The Enterprise was their only defense.
Mhm.
So the Enterprise came in.
Yeah.
I did like how Spock referred to space legends. Um, again, with some of those things where they're just like, let's throw a couple words out there that'll sound like something.
Yeah.
That again, uh, from today, they sound kind of funny hearing it, but at the same time, when you're just buying full on into the show, just like, yeah, of course,
But
space
I thought it
legends
was an
are different than
interesting.
Earth legends.
Yeah, I thought
Um,
it was an interesting analogy to the sea legends of
yeah.
yore, right?
Oh, absolutely. I just, again, I'm laughing about some of the terminology they're using.
Yep.
And I mean, again, almost 60 years ago, I found it interesting. I think it was Kirk that said, out here, we're the only police around. And again, they were the only defense. And that was kind of
Yep.
the role that they were in. I did think it was interesting. And I like that they did portray like as much as I said I didn't like the way the Metrons did some things, I did like that the Gorn was just like, all we did was destroy invaders. What
Yeah.
the hell's your problem?
Yep.
And then
This is a
I did
perfectly plausible explanation. Like,
I did appreciate then that McCoy was like, then we could be in the wrong here. I like that depth that these characters have. I think that's great. I guess what I guess I must really enjoy this show because what I didn't like was a third party coming in and talking shit about the characters that we like.
yeah.
I think that's a little bit of what it is here,
Yeah.
where I was like, who the hell do these Metrons think they are? And I think that might be what I didn't like about them, because their portrayal of humanity was zero nuance, very one or two dimensional, and that was it. They're just like, you're uncivilized, violent folk. And clearly we see Bones considering like, oh shit, maybe we're maybe we fucked up.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I guess thinking through some of that. Oh, yeah, they we learned a couple other things about like the capacity of the Enterprise. They hit warp 7 and they were like, we might want to pump those brakes because
Yeah.
we can't do this for very long. And they were just like, fine, go to warp 8.
And
Um,
nobody was happy with Warp 8. Like
no.
everyone's face when he said Warp 8, we're out. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
So thinking through some of these things and the things that we said, I still I enjoyed the episode. I think it was a very good episode. So I'll stick with my rating of 7. There were things I thought detracted from it, but not so much that I have any major issues with it. And I do like that at the end, Kirk still comes out the hero. Um, and making the right decision. I appreciate that as a viewer. And the
so, so
Metrons can go suck it.
so before we move on,
Yeah.
There was one point that I made my notes in terms of some of the like the underlying themes and stuff like that you didn't hit on, and I'm curious if you caught this. There was a debate as they were chasing the Gorn ship away from Cestus 3 before the Metrons kind of stepped in of do they destroy or do they not destroy the ship?
Mm-hmm.
And Spock had a moment of basically maybe we just fire some warning shots and show them we mean business and then back off. And I thought that tied back really interestingly to the Galileo 7, where he tried to do the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're
Yeah.
just going to go in and show them who's boss, but we're not going to cause any damage because then they'll respect us and back off.
Yeah.
And McCoy's response was, did it never occur to you that they might be emotional, that they might
Yeah.
react with anger? And here we have another situation where you've got this ship, of unknown origin that just pulled off a pretty crafty attack where they wipe out this observation post and then impersonate someone from the observation post to lure the Enterprise in and try to destroy their top tactical people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty elaborate ploy. And Spock's response is, "We'll just show them who's boss and then let them go, and they'll never come back again."
Yeah.
And my thought was, has Spock not learned his lessons? Right?
Yeah.
That
Right.
that it's almost a flaw of logic, right? You thought you took a logical path before, it didn't
Mm-hmm.
work, so you tried to do it again, expecting the same result.
Right.
Expecting the other party to behave in a logical manner, because that's the flaw, right? That
Yeah.
if you behave logically, the other side will too. The reality of it is that never happens.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I mean, kind of a throwaway moment in the episode, but I thought it was an interesting, probably inadvertent link back to the Galileo 7 that kind of showed the lack of growth from Spock from that encounter.
Yeah.
Didn't learn
I
his
can
lesson.
I can see that.
So kind of an interesting thought.
I think the right response to that is fascinating.
Fascinating. Um, the other thing is, I think this is the first time that we've heard that they can't beam down or beam up people with the shields up.
Yes.
And that's an important detail that comes back many, 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 many times. I also think this is the first time they reference photon torpedoes.
Yes, I think so, because I heard that and I was like, "Oh, Star Wars.
Yeah.
They're about
Previously
to destroy the Death Star."
phasers and things like that, right?
Yep. Yeah, the photon torpedoes, when they said that, I did immediately think of the Death Star and destroying it in
And
Star
then,
Wars.
yeah, I mean, a proton torpedo, photon torpedo, what's the difference, right?
Yeah, that's what it made me think of. Now I'm realizing I was dead wrong on that.
We hear references to Starfleet Command again.
Yep.
So we're really establishing that that's the overarching structure behind, what the Enterprise is and what they belong to. We get Scotty starting to kind of flex his engineering prowess. He gets questioned by Spock, and he's like, "No, I've done all of these things already. Like I've tried it all."
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of more than what we've seen from him in a while, or at this point at all. They referred it to what Kirk did as the advanced trait of mercy, which I think kind of goes back to our earlier point of knowing when to stop.
Yeah.
Right. It's not about the violence, it's knowing where do you stop
What's the limit?
Yeah. And then I like that on all of these episodes, I really look forward to that like last couple of closing lines of dialogue
Mm-hmm.
because there's such a template there where they always kind of wrap up the episode so succinctly in something that's pretty profound. And so I know you
Yeah.
hit on it earlier, but I wrote it down word for word. Like I stopped and typed it out. And Kirk says, "We're a most promising species as predators go, Mr. Spock. Did you know that?" And Spock says, "I frequently had my doubts." To which Kirk replies, "I don't. Not anymore." And that's the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked it. Well, I mean, I think it was a great episode. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I agree. It was yeah, well, I guess I still feel like it was really good. I can't quite throw it the 8, but I I
Really fun.
I would have zero qualms about rewatching this episode. I thought it was fun, it was silly, it was good, and we did get to see more people watching other people on TV,
Yeah,
which I'm finding to be a recurring feature
that
in
was
many of
really
these
fun.
episodes.
Yeah,
It's like, and this was literally them like, here, let's sit here because we can't actually communicate anything to him. So let's just think really hard and see if he can figure out what we already know.
yep.
Go make a diamond cannon.
Yeah, right. The other comment that I made, and I wish I had said this earlier because I think it's really interesting. I would be willing to bet that this was top tier drama back in the day. Like the whole Kirk versus the Gorn thing on that planet
Yeah.
and all the close calls back and forth. I bet this was the type of episode that had people on the edge of their seats
Like
for that
how
whole 20 minutes.
and not and who knows? I wish I could go back and understand what it would feel like in that time because
Yep.
right now, I mean, we also know that there's a lot more to come. So we may look at something and just be like, okay, I know of course he's going to get out of this, but how?
Yep.
Versus is he going to make it out of this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are they going to get a new captain? What's going to
Yeah,
happen? Are they
we
all
don't
going to
know.
just die? Is the show over? Um, so yeah, I wonder how it was received back then, where yeah, we can look at it and just be like, all right, he's doing some crazy shit. I wonder how he's going to get out of it, but I
Yep.
know he's going to.
Yep.
Um,
So
yeah,
I know it was good. I
yeah,
really I did enjoy this episode. So
sweet. I got that one sort of right.
yeah.
I
Hey, I
told
think
Abby
we
earlier, I was just like, I enjoyed all these episodes this time, and she was like, oh, that means they were terrible, wasn't it?
I mean, so I'm looking at our ratings, and it is funny because we give you a lot of grief because Abby and
We're
I
all
tend to
pretty
rank
close. I
very
just liked a
close.
few that you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I should run some math on like the standard deviation between all of our ratings on some of this stuff because it isn't much.
No.
It really with like to your point, with a few exceptions, dagger of the mind. There really isn't that much difference. Or what are little girls made of? Oh, what a
Hmm.
terrible episode that was. Um, we're within a point in either direction,
Yeah.
maybe two in some cases.
In most of them, yeah.
So, all right, let's do the next one.
All right. Tomorrow is yesterday,
Mhm.
episode 20. This was another one. I thought it was good. So as I'm writing my notes here, after I watched episode 19, after I watched the arena, I just wrote down some like miscellaneous thoughts that and questions that didn't really have anything to do with that particular episode, and it was before I started watching the next one. And so ironically, I was like, I'm curious what Earth looks like at this time.
Mhm.
It finally like dawned on me, like, okay, as I'm seeing some trivia, this episode takes place in 2267. This episode takes place in 2267. I was just like, oh, 300 years in the future.
Yeah,
Got it.
exactly
May
3 years, right?
finally made that connection that everything is just 300 years in the future. So, but yeah, I was like, okay, um, yeah, what does Earth look like? Is this showing what they think life could or should be like in 300 years, or what they think it will be like. But also like space exploration is clearly standard at this point. I'm curious when in that history this becomes this prevalent, because I can't imagine 300 years from now it just goes from nothing to that.
Yep.
So I'm intrigued to see kind of as some of that gets revealed over
I
time.
love your line of thinking there because that does get covered eventually.
Yeah,
I won't say in this show, but it gets.
I would imagine that it does. And then just kind of what does existence in the rest of the Federation look like? I mean, we've seen glimpses into these colonies or star bases,
Yep.
but still, for the bulk of these 19 episodes up to this point, we've basically been with the crew of the Enterprise. Not too much interaction with others from, say, Starfleet or the Federation or whatever you want to
Or
call
other
it.
species besides the one Vulcan.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
actually, not to go back to the previous episode for too long, that's really the first time that we've seen a very detailed look at another alien.
Yeah.
Right. Certainly a Baylock, but at the end of the day, Baylock was a little
Just a
baby kid,
weird, goofy
not
looking
just
kid.
yeah. But you've had Vulcans and Romulans that number one look like each other. Number
Yep.
two are humans with pointy ears.
Right.
And then we've seen nothing else.
Yeah.
The aliens that we have seen have taken human form.
Right.
Now you have the Gorn, and that's a very different, very detailed
Yeah.
look at an alien. So to that point, like we hear a lot, or we're starting to hear more about the Federation, about Starfleet,
Yep.
about the fact that they're exploring and meeting all these worlds, but we haven't seen really
Haven't
any,
seen much of it.
the alien life, right?
Yep. And then my last thought that I wrote down was like, okay, 300 years in the future, I know they've called it the United Earth ship.
Mm-hmm.
But so is Earth united at this point, and how did that happen and when? So those are things I'm kind of on the lookout for, but I would imagine that will come much later.
We got
Um,
ways to go.
So as I'm thinking about, well, what does Earth look like? All of a sudden, the Enterprise shows up on Earth as a UFO in the late 1960s. So I get none of my answers to any of those questions, but the Enterprise is right there on Earth. Um, yeah, I found this another just good episode. I didn't feel like there was much to dislike in this one, so
Mhm.
I gave this one another 7. I thought it
Yep.
was just good.
I gave it a 7 as well. And I did again,
Got it right. Yes.
I could have it was another one of those where I could have convinced myself to go up or down.
Yep.
There were parts of it that I really, really liked that made me want to push it to an 8. Ultimately, I think I liked it less than Arena, so it kept me from going there. There were things that could have pushed me to a 6, but I kind of wrote them off. Like
Yeah.
some suspension of disbelief. We can
Right.
talk about that later, but like I said, I went back and forth a few times and kind of landed on 7 and
Yeah.
rolled with it.
I think that's kind of how I feel too. I didn't like it as much as the Arena. I thought the Arena was more fun.
Yep.
But I just really didn't feel there was anything like particularly, there was nothing particularly great, nothing particularly mediocre or worse with this episode. It was just good. It brought up some interesting discussions on um like ramifications of time travel,
Mhm.
and things like that I think were pretty interesting.
And very advanced for the 60s to think
Yeah.
about what impact they could have on the timeline
Yeah.
if they change things, right?
Yeah. um yeah, I thought let's see. Sorry, looking at my notes. There were some fun lines in the episode. When Kirk was just like, your logic can be most annoying.
Yeah.
I laughed at
I
that
wrote
one.
down a lot of lines.
Yeah.
Um,
I also liked when Kirk told McCoy, "You're now you sound like Spock," and he said, "Well, I mean, if you're gonna get mean." I
um,
like that kind of
yep.
banter that we've seen throughout many of the episodes. I love that they maintain and build up those relationships and that interaction. That's just fun to see and gives kind of a realism to those relationships because I mean, eh, friends talk shit and they do stuff like that constantly, even if it's the exact same things over and over and over again. There's something very relatable to that that I enjoy. Um
So I'm curious your opinion on this. There was kind of a throwaway second storyline there about the computer being reprogrammed at the planet they were at that was predominantly
yep.
women. So they
Yep.
took the opportunity to like change how the computer worked. Did you
Yep.
like or dislike that?
I just made note that there was discussion of the female computer and that it was repaired on a mostly female planet. And I think Spock did a little bit of an eyebrow raise, like uh where you see him giving a little bit away.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, I thought it was just I made note of it.
It was funny, but I don't think it really added to the story at all.
No.
Although
No.
it did have one of my favorite lines of the whole show, which was an unfortunate tendency to giggle, which I think Spock said that. I didn't write
Yeah.
down who actually said those words. I'm pretty sure it was Spock.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, really funny. Like I laughed
Hmm.
out loud at that. But I think other than that, I don't know why they put that in there. It was not a major story point. It didn't do
Yeah.
anything to advance the story at all. It was just kind of like this kind of funny, like the computer called him dear all the time. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think it really added anything to it. I don't think it really detracted necessarily. It was
Yeah,
just kind of a silly throwaway thing that, yeah,
I'll agree with you there. I don't think it took away from it. I just don't
it was
think
just, yeah, it was
it
just
was
kind of,
unnecessary.
yeah, it was a little just goofy. I thought basically we had another I'm noticing as we watch some of these that there seem to be some recurring trends or themes that will go over a few different episodes where they don't necessarily have an arc per se, but it'll be the same idea coming up for two or three episodes and then they move on to something else or and I mean they're all different enough that it's not the exact same thing over and over again,
Right.
but seeing a recent trend, at least with the arena and then this one, the Enterprise shows up somewhere it's not supposed to be and causes problems for everything that's already there.
Yep.
Um, so again, it's like they're not always this great, we're doing good things. Sometimes they show up and they really mess stuff up.
Yep.
And I thought it was interesting. They took the guy and they were just like, yeah, you can never go back. And we're just going to bring you with us now. And this is what you're doing. And like, okay,
But my favorite part of that is
you just kidnap this dude.
my favorite part is Spock goes to the archives and goes, well, I mean, he didn't have any relevant
Yeah, I don't
contribution,
see anything with this
so
dude's
who
name.
cares if he
So yeah,
disappears?
they're not losing anything.
Yeah, like man, if that's not the ultimate insult, and then to come back later and be like, well, actually,
Your son
yeah,
does
your
some great
son's
things
pretty
that
cool,
lead to
so
us being here right now.
yeah.
He's like, I don't have a son.
Which
So
I mean was kind of a cool reveal, but it
yeah,
was also funny because it still leans into the whole, well, John, you don't have any contributions. Your son, on the other hand, like we gotta let that happen.
yeah.
But if this had happened,
So
you
you have
know, a couple
one
years later, you would
contribution.
have been, you know, whatever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Now, like in kind of a greater discussion on things like that, like I've listened to a number of audiobooks from books by Matt Ridley, and he's got books like how I'm blanking on almost all the names right now, but like The Rational Optimist,
Mhm.
I think The Evolution of Everything, and it's how all these ideas evolve over time. And the idea that if Thomas Edison hadn't invented the light bulb, somebody else would have probably within a matter of years comparable to when Edison did.
Yep.
And that not just exclusive to Thomas Edison, but everything.
Hmm.
Pretty much anything. If we didn't have Elon Musk right now, there would be somebody else developing space travel and electric cars. So it's interesting then to think like, okay, yeah, what if they had taken this guy with them? It's not like then space travel wouldn't have become a thing,
Right.
very likely. But
It would
so
have happened
just
differently,
it would
but
have happened differently, but still would have probably been very similar to the same net result. Um, so again, thinking, okay, how much influence does any one person
so it's
have? And
interesting.
I mean, we can never know because I guess even thinking in some of these like we'll say multiverse terms, we're only on this timeline. This is all that we ever get to experience. But in another universe, whatever, I mean, some of this might happen a different way, but still happen in similar times just because of how these ideas progress.
So I'm trying to find, I'm frantically trying to find this. I don't think I can find it in time, but it reminds me of something. Um, so there's a podcast that I listen to that I really, really, really enjoy. And they're in their third season. It's called World's Greatest Con. Have you heard of it at all?
No.
So um I will say that season one is phenomenal. Season two is okay. And thus far as season three, I've enjoyed. The first season was by far the best. But season three has been pretty good. And he makes reference to so the host is a guy named Brian Brushwood. And Brian is a magician by trade.
Hmm.
And so he's been around for a while. You can find a ton of his videos up on YouTube. Basically, he got famous by going to like bars around the country and teaching people how to do magic tricks with the idea of like, hey, if I can do this magic trick, you'll buy me a beer, right? That kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Um, so he talks about, and I think it had to do with the discovery of calculus. I can't remember, and I can't find the show notes on it to have to go back. But basically, there was some mathematical discovery that two different people found at roughly the same time.
Neptune.
It was not Neptune, it was a math thing. Um,
And
but
Neptune
then
is the
also,
same. Neptune is the same kind of deal where two different people, different areas in the world,
yeah,
basically discovered it at about the same time.
but I think that goes to your point of, well, if it wasn't him, it was going to be somebody else. If
Right.
Edison didn't invent the light bulb, somebody else would have. If
Right.
John Christopher's son didn't go on that mission to Saturn, somebody else would have.
Right.
If so and so didn't discover this mathematical theorem, property, whatever, somebody else would have, kind of thing. And I wish I could remember, because there's like a concept that goes behind that around like dual discovery, and like there's
Mm-hmm.
a whole concept and conversation about this that I just can't remember.
Yeah.
But I think it goes to that point of, can you really mess up the timeline that badly?
Right.
I think that's an interesting discussion, right?
Yeah.
So, oh,
And along those lines, highly recommend those Matt Ridley books. I looked them up. It was How Innovation Works and The Evolution of Everything.
Okay.
They've got a lot of crossover between the two of them, by what I recall. I haven't listened to them in probably a year, but they're very good books about all of that and how these ideas and then inventions and innovations kind of come together, and how they often come from very different directions, and you can have a number of people come to the same realizations or conclusions.
I'll have to add those to the list. I've not heard of
Yeah,
it before.
yeah. Anything I've listened to from him has been awesome.
Oh.
Highly recommended. But yeah, so back to the show. I thought there was just a lot that was just interesting in their discussions of what are the ramifications of time travel, and what you have to be careful of. And basically, do you let somebody know that something could happen in the future, and then they go all Biff from Back to the Future 2 on it? Um, and become basically evil by using that information, or what influence that might have. Now, over time, maybe it all averages out over infinite timelines. But yeah, just interesting that they're having that discussion, even if from things I've read more recently, where I think a lot of the discussion on, say, infinity or multiverses or whatever there might be that we can only speculate in a way.
Okay, Loki. Like,
But yeah, I don't even know where I was going with that, but someone in another timeline does. Um,
put on bump.
Yeah, yeah, I thought it was again just a good episode. We learned some new things about how some of it works. You need a communicator to be able to beam up to the Enterprise.
Yeah, that was an interesting
Which
call.
I liked how that then compounded the problems because they beamed up the wrong guy.
Yeah.
And they're just like, oh, damn it.
It was a
Um,
comedy of errors. Like
yes,
everything that could have gone wrong
yep,
went wrong.
which made for a fun episode. I
Right.
mean, when everything goes right, there's no conflict and there's not really anything good, other than if that is breaking your expectations for what the show will be, then there's the conflict there. But yeah, it was a comedy of errors where everything just compounded. I liked that it did get us back to the trend of them, like, Kirk is really diving into the unknown and having to make a decision that could impact their survival, in
Mhm.
saying, like, hey, what did he say? All we have is a theory and a few facts. And gentlemen, we have to take a chance, especially if one is all we have. So I thought that was really, I liked that a lot. And I liked that, kind of thinking back to, I know I've mentioned in the past, the hero's journey, and the hero's journey that not only is Kirk on, but the entire crew and the ship and what that embodies,
Yep.
um, is on that hero's journey. And part of that is saying, I don't know where this next step is going to take me, but I'm going to take that step anyway.
Right.
And the way that those stories resonate with us, I think this one hit a lot of those points. But again, still just a good episode. It wasn't
Yeah.
wasn't great. There was nothing really to dislike in this episode,
There
though.
there really wasn't. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, so there's kind of two debates, and the bigger debate is the timeline, right?
Yeah,
What do we do about that? How do we get out of here with the least amount of impact to the timeline and preserve, the course of what we know as the future, right? Or the present day for them. There was another kind of a blip of a conversation in there that I thought was equally as interesting, which was, okay, we're taking John Christopher with us. And there was this conversation of how do you teach somebody from the past? How do you make him a meaningful member of society when you pull him 200 years into the future?
Yeah.
Like he knows how things are in the 1960s.
Right.
What is he going to think about things in the 2260s? What does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
is he going to be so far behind that he couldn't possibly be a contributing member to society? And so
See,
that made me stop and think about what would happen in 2023 if we brought someone from 1823 to today. How would
see,
they react?
it's really funny that you mention it in that way, because the way I looked at this was I thought it was really interesting that they went back in time 300 years and understood perfectly how everything worked.
Okay, so that's fair.
But
I didn't catch that.
but you've got this now. So I'm then looking at it, okay, what if we were dropped back in 1723? We wouldn't know how to get anywhere. Like
Yep.
we would be literally lost because we wouldn't have our phones. And so I think it's funny that like I thought that a little bit about him going into the future, but really my focus was, and I think it was when they were just like they went back 300 years and they were just like we need to go get those tapes. And it's just like, okay, I bet if I told my kid to go start a VCR, she would look at me like, what is that?
So that's a
And
great
that is
point.
something that we had 15 years ago. So, I mean, you go back 300 years technologically, and I think there's not enough that's being said about how going back that way into technology that they at the time would know,
Mm-hmm.
we would be just as lost as them coming here. I mean, we'd maybe be able to use some things or figure out some of the tools they have or whatever. But again, I was just like, man, if we got dropped off, say right where we are, where we're each sitting right now, 300 years ago, we'd be lost.
Yeah. So that is a point that I didn't think about. You've also pointed out that I cannot do math because I wrote in my notes 200 years. It's
I
the
almost said something, but then I decided not to.
and I just kind of leaned into it. So 1767 and or 1723 instead of 1823.
Yeah.
God damn it. Um, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And also that is a great point, but the reverse is also true. How did they navigate that time period so well, given that they were so far in the future
Yeah.
that how would we do that if we went back to 1723? What
Now,
would
at the
that
same
look like?
time, they were at a military base. They were, and I mean, the way they've shown it is it's still very similarly built.
Yep.
Now, I think it's funny that it's just like, yeah, pull the tapes. I mean, we still talk about filming something, even though nobody uses film anymore, and
Right.
it's just pressing a button on your phone. Um, but just thinking of the technological advancements we've had in 20 years that like our kids wouldn't have any idea what they're looking at if they saw
Mhm.
a VCR or
Yeah.
even a
No clue.
VHS tape
Yep.
or a cassette tape. I mean, hell, my kids wouldn't even know what a CD looks like. I mean, I guess maybe they'd look at a PlayStation game and say, "Oh yeah, I know what that is," but
Right.
still not understanding. I mean, cars today don't even have CD players anymore.
I had that realization today when I was cleaning out something and I found a CD that was from my old car. And then I went, oh crap, there I couldn't even put this in.
But why would I need to? Because I can just
Right.
get that on YouTube Music or Spotify or whatever.
Because my car literally has the Spotify app built into it.
Right. So I thought it was really funny that you looked at it as like him coming forward, and I would almost think that it would be easier to bring somebody up to speed, but there would be all sorts of difficulties with that
Mhm.
versus even going back. But then I think you'd get people who were paralyzed by like, well, we just always did this, and
Yep.
unable to even see that. So I think that's really that's just really funny that we both looked at that exact same issue from the opposite
Yeah.
directions.
And both of them I think are true to a certain.
Right, right.
Um, it is really, really interesting.
So I I don't have too many other thoughts
I,
on this particular
yeah.
episode. I thought it was fun seeing the characters basically in a different era, but seeing then Kirk and Sulu walking around the naval base or Air Force base or whatever it was, just walking around, and again knowing exactly what to do and where to go to take
Mhm.
care of this. It's like, okay, we've got all this great like technological advancement, yet you're still using effectively like tapes on reels
Yep.
and the precursors of floppy disks.
Yep.
um but kind of the last thing that didn't, I don't know, maybe I just missed something right at the end, but I'm curious how, when they did this time travel, they kicked him back to the 1960s in his cockpit. He didn't seem to remember anything, yet they did. I'm curious how that works.
I think
Because
that's what kept me from rating this episode higher
yeah,
because it makes no sense to me.
agreed. Because he's there and he's just like, I swear I just saw something, and he now has lost hours, days, whatever. They
Because he
did
went
not
back in
lose
time,
they
but
did
they
not
went back
lose
in
that
time.
time. But
Yeah.
he went back in time, but he had already advanced in time those days. So it's like the way they handle time travel in Stephen King's book 11/22/63, in the immediate time when this guy goes through this portal and goes back to 1958, he goes through and he's gone in the present for 2 minutes. That's it.
Mhm.
But then he comes, so he walks out of the, he tells this guy, just wait right here. And he walks out of the room and he comes back 2 minutes later and he's 5 years older
Yep.
and like riddled with cancer. So it's like they're still advancing that time, but and I know it had something to do with basically like lining up and
Yeah.
getting him back there exactly the moment they took him out. But I
But
thought it was interesting that his mind was wiped of it,
mhm.
other than maybe this just hazy image of saw something that he had seen something, but then none of them seemed to have that same effect.
But I had an even bigger problem with it. So number one, that didn't make any sense to me. Like I tried to figure out like the logical leap from where they were to taking these two guys on the Enterprise and putting them back to where they
Mm-hmm.
started and having them not remember. My second thought was, why the fuck did they go through all this work to collect the tapes and try to erase all this evidence and
When they
all
could
these
just undo
things
it.
if they were just going to do this whole we're going to go back in time to go forward in time, and it never happened. And I think that was another point that kept me from rating it higher,
Yeah.
because at the very end of it, it really kind of took me out of it, of like, well,
Yeah.
the it doesn't make sense. Like, I don't understand why we went through all the efforts of the last 20-30 minutes of the show to basically go, well, it didn't matter anyway because none of it ever actually happened. There were no
Right.
tapes, there were no recordings. John Christopher was never beamed up to the Enterprise. He has no memory of that. The guy that found Kirk and Sulu in the records room never actually found them in the records room.
Yeah.
Like, so why did we go through all the machinations to make this happen? And that's where I think that loses a point for me, and why it's a 7 versus an 8.
I agree. And I think I didn't necessarily spell it out that way, but I think that's what prevented me from making it an 8 as well, was just that little bit. I mean, it's just seems unnecessarily confusing, or
Yes.
just it would have been very easy for them to they could have even made it look like he just said, oh, it's just a UFO, but that he knew, but he looked truly confused at the end. So it was like he didn't have any idea. Now, had they done it like it's nothing, and that he was just playing it off like it's nothing, but
Hmm.
you could tell that he still knew, but he looked confused as hell.
Yep.
He was like, I thought I just saw something. So yeah, I think without necessarily putting it into words at the start, that was just kind of a gut feeling that I had that did detract from the episode. And it's tough because a lot of these episodes, if you finish strong, you can in any kind of story, if you finish strong, you can overlook a lot of weaknesses
Absolutely.
early on. Um, so
I think it was a soft ending, and that overall very
otherwise pretty
enjoyable
strong
episode,
episode. Yeah.
but a very soft ending to it.
I think
Um,
that's a great way to put it.
the only thing I'll add, and then we can probably move on, is
Yeah.
we talked about early on, time travel in one of the earlier episodes, and here we see it again, with that slingshot effect, of them, going around the sun, and somehow that's going to take them back in time. And I can't remember which episode that was. Um, maybe was it where No Man Goes Has Gone Before, where we talk about that.
Um,
No, it was Naked Time,
yes.
where they go back in
They went
time.
back 3 days.
Yeah. So we see that come back again, and Abby's not here to confirm this for me, but we will see this again. Like,
Yeah.
this is a thing. So I just, it was
So
kind of cool to see that again.
something I've thought of, and maybe I don't know if I'll explain this very well. Maybe I'll have to type it up and add it as an addendum to this episode at the end,
Mhm.
or maybe I'll just sound insane. Um, I've wondered, like, with that concept of time travel, and I think one of the first times I thought of it was watching, I want to say it was at like Avengers Endgame,
Mhm.
with different timelines and things that they were doing, or Doctor Strange in the Marvel movies. But you've got, like, would that crew of the Enterprise be on now a different timeline than they were at the start, because they have those extra days? So if they go back, are they actually going back to the timeline they left, per se, or are they still on one where they actually went back to somewhere that had that situation before? And I'm probably doing a piss poor job of it
No, I think it's an
communicating that,
amazing question.
but having that, so then thinking like in in like the Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, those movies, kind of treating them just as one. Like, they end up going through all these different timelines to do all this stuff. And then I'm thinking, okay, but are they all just on the one timeline together where all of this succeeds, and really they're then dabbling in a bunch of timelines where they're just messing everything up?
Yep.
And now all of a sudden these other timelines are just like, well, shit, where'd our superheroes go?
Yep.
And that they're all just on this other timeline.
I had not
Um,
thought about that, but I think it's
so
a really, really interesting concept.
so that's been the time travel thought that I've been like percolating for years. And now seeing it here, it's like, oh, okay, just again thinking, okay, well, are there really all these different timelines? And are they
Yep.
just like, they act like they're going back, but really they're still on their timeline, because they have this extra time, and they're going to get these little wrinkles as it goes, where they've got a little extra material in there that they otherwise shouldn't have had.
Right.
So does that put them on a timeline all of their own?
It's a
These are
tough.
the important questions. And
These
now
are
I
the
feel like I'm truly contributing to the conversations that led to this whole thing in the first place.
God damn. I don't have an answer for you, but that is a great question.
Sweet. I feel like I just won Star Trek. I
We'll see. We've got a long ways to go.
guess one last thought I had about time travel and all of that, and it's something I did think of a little bit after this episode. Was thinking about even theoretically, I wonder how time travel backwards would even work. Now, thinking of like Interstellar,
Mhm.
and time travel moving forward, not being so much time travel, but time like dilation, where they're down on the planet with, have you seen Interstellar?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
several
So
times.
they're down, yeah,
Great movie.
phenomenal. But they're down on the planet and they're there for 3 hours and then they get back up to the ship and the guy is like old and
Yeah, it's been
has
like
been there for 23 years.
yeah.
So I wonder if in the future time travel would be more like that. You're not getting people ironically, you're not getting people from the future coming back, but you're getting people from the past coming to you.
Mhm.
Um, so again, that doesn't really apply to this episode other than saying theoretically maybe time travel would be completely different than what they did there.
I think the funny thing is we don't
But
know.
again, these are the things that I end up thinking about because,
Yep.
yeah. All right. On to another episode in which we get to watch people watch TV. And and we see the court system in 300 years being, I would say, less than great. Their way of doing things. Uh, for another episode, I enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed this one the most of the three that we watched. I gave this one an 8.
Okay. Interesting.
I just I enjoyed the episode a lot. I didn't necessarily like the way their court system is run.
For sure.
But I thought there was a lot to enjoy in this episode, and the twist at the end I truly did not see coming, and I thought it was awesome. When they had the big reveal, I was just like, "Oh, that's good." And maybe that alone is what made me really enjoy this episode because
Okay.
they're in terms of how they run their trials and their court martials and all that. And we saw that in the menagerie. Um, there's a lot to be desired, and I think we've regressed an awful lot in the next 250 years if that's where we find ourselves. Um, but setting that aside and saying, okay, all TV courtroom dramas are inherently nothing like actual courtrooms. Um, I found this episode incredibly enjoyable.
Well, as someone who's done jury duty a couple of times now, TV courtroom dramas are nothing like what real life court is like.
Yeah,
I've done it twice. I've done some crazy cases in both cases. Because nothing in my life ever is easy. But I also really enjoyed this episode. Um, I can understand why you gave it an 8. There were a couple of things that really bugged me about this episode that knocked me back down to a 7.
fair.
But I enjoyed it. I think overall it's an interesting way of looking at how they handle things like this in the future.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's a cool story. I think the twist at the end is really interesting. Um, I just there were a few things in there that I was like, eh, uh, bugged me.
Yeah,
It took it down a notch for me.
that's fair.
Uh,
I just I think I like just smiled when they made the reveal at the end.
Mhm.
I thought it was just I I didn't see it coming. I know I was sitting there, like we said in some of the other episodes, thinking like, oh, I no doubt that Kirk was going to get out of it,
Right.
but
It
wondering how are they going to pull this off, especially when she's like, pause that video.
and
Um,
to level set, the twist is the fact that Finney was still alive.
right.
Yeah.
When he made that revelation, and they were basically like, there were three people that could have altered this record, and it was you, Mr. Spock, or your records guy who was Vinny. And it was like, oh shit,
And
like
it
he's
actually was
not dead.
Finney.
Um, I thought that was such a good twist that they brought up, and just the interesting discussion that they had, where he was like, "I was looking really hard for this guy," and when they said that presupposes a desire to be found, when they said that line, I was like, "That is brilliant."
That was really
Um,
smart,
I
right?
loved that line. I loved that reveal that all of this was orchestrated by this guy who Kirk was had who perceived Kirk had wronged him years prior and then held this grudge. Um, I thought that was just a great way of telling the story, a great reveal. I loved it. Um, now, now, as far as all the courtroom side of it goes, I thought all of it was somewhere between laughable and atrocious,
Yep.
as far as legal precedents would be. Um, I, I consider myself a law expert because I watch some people on YouTube. Um, far from an expert, but in a different timeline, I definitely could have seen myself being an attorney. Um, but yeah, some of the things in how the court proceedings went were terrible,
Mhm.
but hilariously so.
Yeah.
um and I don't know if that's what kind of detracted from the episode for you. um
Some of it. Yeah.
yeah, and I guess some of the commentators I watch on like legal stuff today, um, I have that kind of cynical, just oh my gosh, feeling about pretty much anything on TV in a courtroom. So
Yep.
while this seemed almost exaggerated to some of that, you look at any courtroom scenes in any show today, and almost all of them are just ridiculous. And so I just filed this away with everything else, um, and said, okay, I'll stipulate to all of that,
Yep.
and then move
Stipulate. Nice
on.
choice of words there, Mr.
Very,
Not quite a lawyer guy.
very deliberate.
Yep.
I said something when Abby and I were talking recently, and I said, yeah, stipulated. And she was like, you're watching too much of your lawyer stuff. But um, yeah, I thought there were some interesting conversation points in this episode, particularly with the distrust of technology. Um, and Kirk's lawyer, who I think was a pretty bad lawyer, uh, was very much like, I don't need those damn computers. I've got books, and I love books. I'm all about books, but at the same time, this was another situation where I felt the show was a little convoluted in their messaging, because it's like you're in this very technologically advanced society here, but like you're having a very negative view of technology in this particular episode, when ironically at the end it wasn't even the technology, it was the people
Yeah.
who really made the technology unreliable.
It's an interesting conversation because I guess I hadn't thought about it like that. but I agree with you in that if you take a step back, his lawyer was very confident that he could get Kirk off. Like this
Yeah.
was going to be fine. But I think if you didn't have the efforts of Spock and the rest of the crew digging into this and being like, well, wait a second,
Yeah.
this doesn't add up. I don't I don't think his lawyer was going to get Kirk off. I think he would have been
No.
court-martialed and thrown out of Starfleet.
Hmm.
And so I
I think
hadn't
his lawyer was terrible.
yeah, no, I think you're right. I had not had that thought before right now. But I agree with you. I think Spock literally saved the day there.
Yeah.
Um, I will say, and I'm going to completely derail this conversation just because I want to talk about this point.
Why not?
So I
That's
totally
what this is
acknowledge that
about.
this is like a hard right turn.
That's what this is all
Um,
about.
this had one of my favorite lines I've had so far, which is they're in this bar. Kirk has just walked out. This woman just walks in. McCoy's talking to her, and she goes, "Oh, I'm an old friend of Kirk's." And McCoy's response to that was absolutely amazing.
My
All
friends
my
all
old
look like
friends look like
doctors.
doctors. All his look like you. And I laughed so hard. And
Yep.
I had to rewind it so that Katie could watch it because I thought it was so funny and so like very McCoy versus Kirk, like that
Yep.
dynamic. That was great. I
But
laughed really hard at
but
that.
again, it's like incredibly sexist there. Like
100% it is. It's
it's
still
like
really
it's
funny.
like uh it's like the old episode of Faulty Towers when a doctor and his wife, or they both have doctorates, come up and uh, they basically say doctor and doctor, and he was like, "Oh, you're two doctors. Like they let you take the test twice."
So I've never watched Faulty Towers, but I've heard amazing things about
Oh,
it.
hilarious. I watched it with my dad growing up.
Okay.
But yeah, I laughed. I think I laughed out loud at that line too.
It's so funny.
It was like, and all of his old friends look like you. Oh,
So I laughed at that. This is also kind of going back to the same part of the episode. This is also the first time where we see and hear about other ships like the Enterprise.
yes, I did
Um,
note that the opening shot showed another
and
ship.
and I think, and we should probably go back and check the trivia on this because I couldn't really make out a registry or a name in the background, but they did make reference to the Intrepid.
Hmm.
So I think it was the Intrepid. But also when he's in the Commodore's office, there's a board in the back that shows all the ships. So you get a bunch of registry numbers and I think names. But you see there's obviously more ships now than just the Enterprise.
Yep.
Um, they specifically call out the Republic and its registry number of NCC 1371. Um, so we're starting to build out this. Up until this point, we really didn't hear about other ships. It was just we were hearing Federation, or hearing Starfleet, we're hearing
Right.
Starfleet Command, but it's the Enterprise. So what else is
Yep.
out there?
Oh, one note I forgot from the last episode was they mentioned there are only 12 like the Enterprise in the
Mhm.
fleet. So again, kind of building that
Yep.
world, that universe that we're operating in
And I'm
with
gonna
this
go
series.
full nerd here because I heard that as well, and I interpreted that as of the same design as the
Yes.
Enterprise, which they haven't talked about it yet, but the Constitution class. So they don't rule out the fact that there are other classes of ships with different
Oh
configurations, but
yeah. I guess I didn't even think of it like that. I thought there were 12 others that were basically the Enterprise, just
yeah,
different names.
yep.
And yeah, so looking up some of the trivia here, we get a look for the only time in the series at a series of registration numbers on the chart in Stone's office associated them with 10 names previously used in production memos, which will later be assumed to be Constitution-class starships, despite the numbers ranging lower than the USS Constitution. At the time of the
Interesting.
court-martial, the USS Intrepid, the all-Vulcan starship, is being repaired at Starbase 11.
There you go.
So, and I don't yet know what that is. But yeah, interesting. I did make note, like the opening shot shows another similar ship.
Very cool.
So
That's
again,
really
just kind of
exciting.
building out that universe. It's
Yeah.
fun to witness that. So a few things to complain about their horrible judicial system in
Hmm.
at least the military wing of the reality of 300 years from now is one, how that prosecutor wasn't like forced to recuse herself, didn't
Yeah.
automatically
How did she
recuse
not
herself,
conflict out?
and
Like,
how they let Kirk just decide like, oh no, I'm good with it.
no.
um that I I don't even know how.
Yep.
I thought it was funny that when Spock started speculating on something, she said, tell him, remind him not to speculate. And then fast forward, she's questioning McCoy and asks him exclusively speculative questions and basically says, will you please speculate on this? So I was just like, oh, that's some solid lawyering there.
Yep.
Don't speculate, but please do. I thought those were a couple of the points I had. Ironically, even though I liked this episode the best, I have the fewest notes from this one. And I think it was more of just a feeling at the end of it that I just really enjoyed it. And I absolutely loved that twist.
Hmm.
Um, even after the twist, I thought the episode kind of went downhill from there. Having the fight or whatever with Finney in the engine room was kind of take it or leave it. But I absolutely loved that twist.
The other thing that I struggled with a lot was they go and they establish that Finney is still alive.
Mhm,
Kirk is going down to the engine room to get him.
mhm,
They're bringing up Jamie, right? That was her name, named
mhm.
after James, which that's a different interesting thing altogether for two guys that hate each other. He named his daughter after him, which
Well,
could
didn't
happen,
always hate him.
right? But I don't think they did a good job of establishing that timeline
Yeah.
of how that works. Um, but also there was a point where they're like he's going down to get Finney, and they're like, so we're done here, right? I mean, the court martial's over, and the
Mhm.
Commodore's like, well, no, it's not over until we see what happens. So like, well, wait a second, you put the man on trial
For
for
killing somebody.
killing somebody, and we've literally just established that he's still alive, but the trial isn't over. I mean, in any other world, that's an instant dismissal. And why are we still here?
Right.
Like, I didn't that took me out of it a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
it just that bugged me. Beyond that, yes, I kind of agree that the fight of it was a little redundant. I think the dialogue behind it was kind of interesting. I think that
Yeah.
you could have taken the same dialogue and acted it out differently, and it would have had a better effect.
Yeah.
So
So going back to some of the trivia um here, they didn't make it clear necessarily why Jamie changed her mind about Kirk. They
yeah,
said that
that
she
was
read the
weird.
letters and saw how much they cared. But apparently there were before that there were it was written in the script to that she read these old letters and realized that this is the kind of shit her dad would try to pull
Yep.
to frame Kirk. Um, which then explains some of it. And there was also another scene that they filmed but removed. They cut from the episode where Jamie comes into the engineering room during the fight between Kirk and Finney, and that um when Finney sees her, he then is just like, okay, I don't want her to die too. So then he tells Kirk how to go fix what he broke.
I think that was missing from this episode. Like
Yep.
they made reference to the fact that she was coming up to the ship. His lawyer was going to get her in an attempt to diffuse the situation, but you never see that.
Yep.
And I think that really could have changed that dynamic a
And
little
it
bit.
could have been Kirk just bullshitting him saying,
Right.
she's here. You don't want her to die too.
Yeah.
So I think I would wonder how long that scene would have been, but that even if it was 5 seconds, could have 5-10 seconds could have made that a bit more clear. But apparently it was a long episode, and basically they used a voiceover to kind of allude to it. But yeah, apparently there was something filmed where she showed up, and that's when he realized, like, okay, I don't want this. I don't want to go through with this. So I'm going to tell Kirk how to fix what I broke.
Yeah.
Which I think, yeah, would have made more sense. They did do some with the voiceover, so it was somewhat addressed. But yeah, I think that would have been a better effect having that
Right.
in there.
So I think there's one thing that I called out that also made me laugh and kind of bugged me. At one point, they said it's 1 to the 4th power. I went, so that's one. Okay.
I
Cool.
missed that.
I that one also made me laugh for all the wrong reasons. I it probably should have been 10 to the 4th power, but here we are. The other thing is they made a reference. I think it's really interesting in today's world to have this reference in there. And again, kind of a throwaway line, but talk about humanity fading in the shadow of the machine.
I I literally just was gonna highlight that line.
What a
I thought
great
that was
line.
awesome.
And when you look at today with artificial intelligence and all the
Hmm.
stuff that we're seeing come out and the impact that that could have on our daily lives and how we do our jobs and all of that, um I don't know, that one hit me really hard,
Yep.
because we've been talking a lot at work about those topics
Right.
and the impact to the workforce and the impact to security in general. And what does this mean for organizations long term? Since we've seen such a huge advance over a very short period of time.
Hmm.
And then to have that line get thrown out there, I'm like, holy crap.
I thought that line was brilliant.
Absolutely. So I really, really liked that. Um, the other things that I think kind of took me out of the episode was they never really established what this pod thing was for and
Hmm.
why it was necessary for a person to go into it during an ion storm.
Yeah.
And it also didn't make a whole lot of sense to me why Kirk just magically has a button on his chair for yellow alert, red alert, jettison pod.
Yeah.
Like the first two, okay, get it. Like you know, something
Okay.
happens, you got to change the alert status of the ship very
Yep.
quickly. What?
So there's trivia
Of
from
course.
IMDb on this.
Yep.
Says it's never clearly explained why Kirk is under pressure to jettison the pod. In his adaptation of the script in Star Trek II, James Blish, must be whoever did that adaptation, establishes that the pod is directly exposed to the vacuum of space, allowing its instrumentation to take accurate readings. However, its plastic construction picks up radiation from dangerous ionization particularly quickly and must be jettisoned when its contamination begins to pose a threat to the rest of the ship.
So I will take that as a fairly plausible explanation. Although I don't understand why you would then allow a person back into the ship that is now probably just as irradiated as said pod. But they could have fleshed that out differently or better in the episode. I think, looking past that, it's still is a solid episode. Like, still very enjoyable. There were just little things that took it down a notch for me. I think the idea that they could use the internal sensors to look at heartbeats, to detect heartbeats, and then start to exclude them one by one is kind of an interesting take on things, so that you're left with one somewhere on the ship. My struggle then was, after all of that, why is Finney still on the Enterprise?
Yeah.
If he was trying to fake his death so that he could frame Kirk and either get him thrown out of Starfleet or thrown in whatever Starfleet's equivalent of prison is, why didn't he take an opportunity to get off the Enterprise? And
well, where would he have gone? And how would he have
down
gotten
to
there?
the planet? I mean,
Well, that was a starbase, so I mean, it looked like it was a big planet, but it was Starbase 11 who was
okay,
doing the court martial. So you show
that's
up
fair enough.
there, all of a sudden the ruse is up. I think his hope was maybe his motivation was to get Kirk shit canned, and then he'd just be like, "All right, hey, I was kidding, but I'm here, and you already fired him, so let's just keep that
Right,
as it was, and you give me what's rightfully mine."
right. Give me the
Uh,
ship.
yeah. So, I mean,
And maybe
clearly it wasn't a great plan.
no, terrible plan. So I don't know. That just didn't stick for me.
Yeah.
There were a few lines I really liked. Not bitter enough to forget to thank you for your efforts. That was a great line. McCoy going into Spock, "You're the most cold-blooded man I've ever met." Spock says, "Why, thank you, Doctor."
I like that.
And then at the very end, I forget what the lawyer's name was that prosecuted, but they're on the bridge and they go to kiss each other, and she's making this big deal of, what's your crew gonna think if we kiss each other on the bridge in front of them? And they do it, and at the end he goes, "See, no change. Discipline goes on." And she says, "And so must the Enterprise."
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought that was a really funny set of lines, followed by, "She's a very good lawyer, obviously." Indeed, she is. Like I said, I look forward to the ends of those episodes because there's usually some really great dialogue in there that's either very profound or very funny, or both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm looking at the transcript here, and at the end, when Kirk tells her better luck next time, and she says, "I had pretty good luck this time. I lost, didn't I?" Um, it's yeah, that's interesting. An interesting perspective that she was
Yeah,
fighting hard to win a case that she didn't want to win,
exactly. I'm trying to turn
which
my lights
from
back.
which she should have recused herself in the first place.
Yep.
Yeah. What other notes did I have on this episode? I thought it was interesting that she objected to all of the decorations and awards that Kirk had, and he kept listing them off of all these like great things, these awards he's received. And he's just like, well, I wouldn't want to waste the court's time by letting them know how awesome Kirk is here. And then he does a little bit more, and he's just like, "Oh, that's probably enough, but there's more."
Yeah, right.
I thought that was That was
It's
interesting.
really great.
Again, we see just you see like we've got 21 episodes of seeing Kirk be this heroic figure. And then also getting that reminder that there's a reason this is the crew we're following here in this story, this overall story of where things are in 2267.
Yep.
We're following this crew, we're following this guy, and there's a reason because he's that awesome. Um, I thought that was funny, though, the way his lawyer was just like, how dare you expect me to not list off everything he does? And then he rattles off like four more things, and he's just like, there's
Yeah.
more, but
I've made my point.
well, yeah. Well, I think you get the point. You get the gist, huh?
Right.
Um,
Did you catch that they made the comment of no captain has ever stood trial?
I do recall that. I didn't make note of that, but I recall that.
That was interesting too.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know if I buy that or not, but it's an interesting plot point, right?
yeah. Uh,
Um,
I found it. Did you hear how they referred to Spock's race in this one?
Volcanians.
Volcanian. That
Like
seemed weird.
that was
Um,
it did not roll off the tongue very well, did it?
it most certainly did not. Um, yeah, that's most of the notes
Yeah,
that
I
I
don't.
have. I did like again, we've got them kind of all the crew all working together to solve the problem, solve the mystery that's in front of them. And you know, as viewers, we kind of knew like there's no way Kirk would make a mistake and just kill
Yeah.
somebody before it was time. He wouldn't make a mistake like that. And if he did, he would own it. So
Yep.
he wouldn't make that mistake for one, but two, he wouldn't then lie about it or be wrong. So um yeah, so I said, as viewers, we also knew there was no way Kirk would make that mistake or be wrong about his assessment of the situation. And even when they showed the video, I feel like Kirk embodied the perspective of the viewers, where it's just like, no, that's not right. I know what I'm seeing, but that can't be right.
Right.
And of course was proven to be the case. So we see yet again, it's like we know Kirk is going to get out of this, but there's a lot of questions of, oh man, how's he going to pull this
Yeah.
one off?
How you gonna do it?
And I loved that again. It was the crew, it was Spock, and it was McCoy coming together, and everyone working together to say like, hey, we know this. What you're saying, I can't necessarily prove it yet, but you're wrong, and I'm just going to stand by that.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they tried trapping Spock on the stand, he's just like, uh, no,
What? That was never a great strategy.
no. Um,
I
but yeah,
don't speculate. Like,
again, it made just for in a thoroughly enjoyable episode. I think I enjoyed this one the most of the three, which is why I gave it the highest rating of the three. Um, but yeah, I thought all the episodes we watched this time were between good and great. These were three
very solid.
a fun week of episodes. So hopefully it continues here.
I
Do you have
agree.
any closing thoughts on Captain Kirk's court martial?
I don't think so. I think I've kind of covered everything. Again,
Yeah,
great episode. Like,
yeah.
very, very solid. Certainly top of the pack. Um, really, really, really enjoyed it. There were a few things that kind of detracted me from it, but at
Hmm.
the end of the day, that's okay. That's probably always going to happen to a
Right.
certain. So I'm curious to see now the next three as we get closer and closer to the end of season one.
Yeah.
Can we sustain this pace? Right now, we're getting into a handful of episodes that I don't remember again,
Mm.
so I can go
So
in relatively fresh.
yeah. So again, like some closing thoughts on all three of these episodes. While I saw similarities in some of the themes, particularly in the first two, where you've got the Enterprise showing up and messing stuff up where they don't belong, and then causing problems across the board. Um, it's like you're seeing, I think the series is really, I think, has found its footing at this point.
Yep.
It knows what it is. It knows we're going to make some social commentary here. We're going to try to show people what should be or what could be.
Mhm.
And we're going to exhibit that through the telling of stories, which
Mhm.
is what stories have been used for since stories were first told. And they're using the medium of television in what I can only imagine is still a very new way of using this medium at that time,
Yep.
by looking ahead to the future and saying, not just, okay, you're going to see things that you can recognize, but here's the way things could be very different. Another
Mhm.
thought I had is, like, obviously in the late 1960s, racial tensions are still super high. Hell, they're high today in 2023.
Yep.
But you've got the Commodore is like race just doesn't factor in,
Uh,
except for when they're talking about Vulcans.
but
Um,
but it's so funny you call that
but
out because I think that's a
it's
great point.
it's just anyone is in these positions, and it just is. They're not they're making a strong commentary, I think,
Mhm.
without preaching it, without verbalizing it. They're just doing it, which I think is very powerful.
Yeah.
In seeing that they're showing that a lot of these things where, particularly in the 1960s, people may have cared more than we do today.
Mhm.
uh, they may have looked at it and thought like, oh wow, you've got a black woman on the bridge doing these things like Uhura. And I think they just do it, which is awesome because
Well,
they show that it doesn't matter.
and in this case, in this episode, you have a black man that
Right.
outranks Kirk, and I didn't think about that because
But they don't make any deal of
no,
it.
he just
It just
is,
is. And
right.
I think that's awesome.
And I just think it is interesting because you're right. That was probably a bigger deal then. I didn't even think about that until you brought it up.
Right.
Because in my mind, it's like there's a guy who's a Commodore and he outranks Kirk, and that was the
Exactly.
end of it. Like it
Right.
never even occurred to me that oh yeah, he's black, and
That
that is a very
that may have been a big deal in 1967.
yep.
And I think it speaks to the progress we've made as society. That
Mhm.
cool. I mean,
I think
like
that it's a
that
great
it's
thing to not notice it.
a non-factor. But again, thinking back to the time that this was coming out, and just I think it's great that they can have those things where a lot in this show just is, versus being something they're making a point of. I think that's even more powerful for them to just say like this is just reality.
Yep.
Um, and I think that's awesome, and I think very effective.
Yeah. Agreed.
So
Cool.
yeah, I think this might be the best three episode set we've had yet.
I
I
agree.
thoroughly enjoyed all of the episodes. I thought they were great, and yeah, I love that. Yeah, I've felt a lot less in each of these. The show is still figuring out what it is or what they're trying to do. Um, yeah, I think it's just it at this point knows what it is and maybe is testing the boundaries of what it can do or reaching out to say, okay, what can we do with what we are? Um, but yeah, I think it's awesome, and I am still growing in my understanding of like, yeah, I see why this resonated with people back then and why it can still resonate with people now.
I'm so excited for the things to come. I know I say that every week, um, because if if you think this is good now,
Yeah.
Just wait.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm really glad that we upped it to 3 episodes a week so we can
Yeah,
actually get through this
let's
a
go.
little bit faster.
Let's get her done.
I mean, at this point, we've got 3 weeks left of season one,
Yeah.
and then
Listen.
yeah, we're 21 episodes in. We're over a quarter of the way through the original series, which I never thought is something I would ever have done
Mm-hmm.
before this, but this has been just a blast.
Yeah.
Looking forward to more. So next week we'll have the Return of the Archons, Space Seed, which okay, and A Taste of Armageddon.
What a great name for an episode. I don't remember
So
what it's about, but what a great
that
name for an
that's a
episode.
fantastic name. Just looking ahead. So hopefully the name it matches hopefully the episode matches the name.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, looks like 3 weeks left in season one. That's kind of awesome. Well, there you go. We're now over a quarter of the way through the original series. Honestly, I thought it would take a bit longer, but I'm pretty sure I'm a Trekkie now. First off, I find myself looking forward to sitting down and watching Star Trek. I have a hard time stopping with just 3 episodes, but I hold myself back because I don't want to get ahead of the podcast. Which brings up the second point. For as much as I enjoy watching the episodes, I really enjoy our discussions following. But really, I think I donned the title of Trekkie the moment I became defensive of our favorite crew of our favorite ship. They may be flawed, they may reflect on their individual and collective shortcomings, but don't you dare make them out like they're bad guys. We know they're imperfect. They know they're imperfect. But villains, get out of here with that garbage. For you sports fans out there, I feel like Terrell Owens talking about Tony Romo saying, "That's my captain. That's my captain." So, I guess I'm a Trekkie. I do realize I just said that Kirk and this version of the Enterprise are our, quote, favorites. Calm down. I'm talking rhetorically, not making any claims about the other captains I have yet to see. This was the best set of episodes we've watched yet. They were all strong. They all had their weaknesses, but overall the strengths were just greater. Arena felt a bit like what non-Trekkies assume every episode of Star Trek is. Not so much the part with a godlike being forcing a fight and some convoluted discussion on the merits of humanity, but the Gorn fight itself. Kirk on some strange desert planet fighting some strange lizard alien in a super slow motion, campy kind of way. Yet there were 18 episodes before we reached what I assumed many of the episodes would be when I started this. Tomorrow is Yesterday gave us an exploration of the ramifications of time travel, and Court Martial was a fun episode, but doesn't give me much hope for the justice system in the 23rd century. The episodes were fun enough, but my biggest takeaway this week was that I finally contributed to the kinds of conversations that led to this podcast in the first place. Now, instead of sounding like an idiot saying, "Oh yeah, I watched an episode of Voyager with lizards," I could come to the defense of Kirk and crew. I could offer a hypothesis that if Colonel Sean Jeffrey Christopher was not born to John, that somebody else would have likely reached Saturn in a similar time frame. And entertaining conversation, at least for us, ensued. I began this project as a complete outsider. It began as a thought experiment. Part one of my task was to understand what it is that makes people like this franchise. While I don't think you can ever isolate it to one thing, even from early on, I caught glimpses of things that I thought could draw someone in and keep them coming back. As I continued watching, I began to feel that draw myself. It's pulling me in and keeps bringing me back. Part 2 of my task was to get fully on board, not as part of some thought experiment, not deconstructing the show as some detached observer, but watching as a legitimate fan. And that's where I am. I still like to think of myself as a student of stories. I like breaking down what works and what doesn't, and that won't change. I guess I'd put it like this: I would continue watching even if I wasn't doing this podcast. So thank you again for joining us. If you're watching along, next week we will be discussing 3 more episodes of the original series: The Return of the Archons, Space Seed, and A Taste of Armageddon. I'll be honest here, I try not to judge too much based on title, but Space Seed? Really? I guess I'll just have to wait and see. As always, if you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. For Nate, this is Aaron reminding you to never give up, never surrender.
Like I said, I look forward to the ends of those episodes because there's usually some really great dialogue in there that's either very profound or very funny, or both.